Hello, people of YouTube land and those that are involved in our, I guess Ted's community? Since
We're
you, Bud, and Mike are the
yeah, we can.
fearless leaders here.
I'll take it, but yeah.
I know it's a very open door policy, but
Absolutely.
this is the Cridge Crew gaming James Bond podcast where me, a James Bond fan, and Ted, not so much a James Bond fan, watch all the James Bond films and talk about them after each time that we watch one of them. We're doing this in release order with the exception of Casino Royale, which we are doing the earlier versions of Casino Royale after we hit the Daniel Craig one. Just so that way there aren't any spoilers on Ted's part, so that way he could actually see Casino Royale proper as opposed to um I wouldn't say failed attempts beforehand, but like not as good attempts.
Works for me.
Although I haven't seen the entirety of like Casino Royale 1967, but I wasn't a fan.
Fair enough. Hey, if you know you don't need to be a fan without watching the whole movie. Honestly, I'll take that.
but but those aren't the official canons by Aeon Film Productions, which it was founded by Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. And we are going to get to how Dr. No came to be, because that's what we're starting with, the first proper Bond film, which was uh, kind of an interesting story how we actually get to Dr. No being the first one made. As I said, there are earlier versions of Casino Royale made, and that is the first Bond novel. If you didn't know, the James Bond, all that character comes from a novel series by a man by the name of Ian Fleming, who based a lot of this stuff on his time while into the Secret Service. Although he was no James Bond, but he knew people that were probably influenced James Bond. But he wrote 13 James Bond novels throughout his lifetime and two short story compilations of James Bond. All the novels and short stories have been made into films, with the exception of 4 of the short stories. Those haven't been used as Bond titles yet. Um, which would be The Property of a Lady, which was almost a Bond film, but we'll get to that much later when we get to Timothy Dalton's tenure. The Hildebrandt Rarity, Risico, and 007 in New York, which that title I don't think they're going to use. But all other stuff from like the Fleming source material has been made into a movie, whether it follows the plot or not. But there are elements of like from different novels and different short stories that get thrown into like different movies, because they obviously didn't shoot these in order. But anyway, Fleming wanted to make a James Bond, bring Bond, his character James Bond, to the movie screen. Actually enlisted a screenwriter by the name of Kevin McClory to make a Bond movie by the name of Thunderball. That fell through, and Fleming just made Thunderball into a novel, which ended up turning into a lawsuit that we'll get to when we get to the Thunderball episode. After that, or before, I'm not quite sure off the top of my head, Fleming was approached by NBC for their series Climax to basically make Casino Royale a episode of like their Climax series. So NBC bought the rights to Casino Royale, which is why that wasn't the first Bond film made. Sometime a producer, Cubby Broccoli, who was a huge James Bond fan, he decided that he was actually gonna bring Bond to the screen. Saw that all the, books, with the exception of, Casino Royale and Thunderball, because with the Thunderball lawsuit, were, bought by this one man by the name of, Harry Saltzman. Cubby Broccoli offered to buy those film rights off of Saltzman, and Saltzman basically replied with, "Nah, bro." And, then, Cubby Broccoli had the bright idea. It's like, "Oh, why don't we just team up together and make these films together?" And he's like, "Yeah, bet." So, they end up having, uh, that idea and went with Doctor No because the plot of the Doctor No in the book is about, the villain Doctor No, sabotaging, missile test launches in Turkey. And since during, the time period, it was during the, NASA shuttle launches into space, and it looked like, the US was losing the space race, they figured, "Hey," it was, kinda topical, and so they basically make the, change the whole villain's plan. Instead of, like, sabotaging, test missile launches, it is, sabotaging NASA launches out of Cape Canaveral with, like, a radio beam, like, gun or machine or whatever.
They
I can't remember if it's totally, specified.
they didn't. It didn't feel like they went super specifically into it. Like they mentioned that Doctor No was trying to interrupt you know the space adventures of the U.S., but I don't know that they ever went into exactly how that was done instead of just disrupting it.
I know it has to do with the radio beam because, like, the, Wikipedia says that it's a radio beam.
Fair enough.
But, that's about as what I got. But anyway, this film, took, like, $1 million to make, which is, even adjusted for inflation, is really cheap. But it, did very well in the box office. It made, like, $6 million the first time it came out, like, the first, during the first day, and overall, like, went, like, $54 million of, money back then. Um, Probably because of the popularity of the book series, which was much like Game of Thrones and Harry Potter as today's equivalents of how popular they were. Even, like, President JFK was a fan and demanded Doctor No to be, screened at the White House. And, due to the hype around this movie, um, they were already greenlit for a second film. So, right off the bat, like, a new production company, Aeon Films, with the backing of United Artists, um, they definitely hit gold with this. And obviously, because we're here today talking about these films, like, if it was a huge flop, we wouldn't be
Yeah,
here.
absolutely.
But, anyway, another, thing, let's see here, it was directed by Terrence Young, who ended up, directing 2 other Bond films, that being the next one, For Russia with Love, and Thunderball, which is the 4th, James Bond movie. Editor is Peter Hunt, who later went on to direct another Bond film by the name of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Uh, the music was written by, a man by Monty Norman, who, wrote the James Bond theme, which is, uh, in competition of, probably being, like, the theme for Doctor No. It's either that or a song by the that Norman wrote. Oddly enough, I thought it was just a Jamaican tune, but From Underneath the Mango Tree, which does pay off. We'll talk that about, like, stuff that we like about the film
Sure.
with, From Underneath the Mango Tree. Um, and, production design was, by Ken Adam, who ended up doing production designs for a lot of the Connery Bond films, and was even poached by, Stanley Kubrick, who was very impressed by his set designs in this film. Uh, the cast, some of them are most of them are fairly known if, you know, like, British, like, European films. Others are unknown, like, Sean Connery was, like, only in a couple films before this. Ursula Andress was the same way. It's kinda funny how she actually got casted as Honey Rider. She, had her picture taken by her then husband that was a photographer, and Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman just saw the picture and they're just like, "Yeah, we're casting her," without, like, you know, questioning or not if, she could pull off, like, a, Caribbean accent and not, like, being blatantly Swiss German, and so therefore she is, dubbed despite knowing perfect English. Um, Also, Sean Connery, contrary to popular belief, he did not win a contest to be James Bond. The contest winner actually wasn't adequate to be James Bond, so they just made it seem like it was Sean Connery who won. Really, like Saltzman and Broccoli saw Sean Connery in a musical, and we're like, "Yeah, we want him." And when he came in, he looked basically like he had like 5 o'clock shadow, looked all scruffy and everything. And, therefore, they had to pretty much clean him up, and Terrence Young had to basically teach him how to be a culture snob, which is what Bond is, you know, a dashing, dapper, high-class individual. Um, Another, character that's throughout, the Bond series, Felix Slider, played by, Jack Lord, who I believe yeah, he was, in, Hawaii Five-O, which was a popular TV series, uh, back before our time.
Yeah, since been remade, but yeah.
Yeah, um, this is his only time playing, Felix Slider since, when the character was coming back in Goldfinger, the 3rd Bond film, he demanded to be paid just as much as Sean Connery, and they're like, "Yeah, see ya." So, so starts the tradition of, not Jack Wood, I mean, of, Felix Leiter being recast every time he's appeared, with the exception of the Daniel Craig films where they finally actually have someone repeat the role more than once. Um, then, we have Lois Maxwell as Miss Moneypenny. Um, and then, Eudice, Gayson as, Sylvia Trench. Oddly enough with those is that they were supposed to have, like, the opposite roles, but, Lois Maxwell thought that the costumes that Sylvia Trench was to wear, such as the dress and also wearing nothing but a shirt when she like meets up with Bond. Lois Maxwell thought that was kind of too revealing, so therefore they switched roles, which is not the only time that they switched roles. Because I found out that the person that plays Annabelle Chung, which is the photographer, Marguerite Loirs, who is at the time, the winner of, like, Miss Jamaica. She was supposed to be Miss Tarot and, did the same thing, like, I don't really wanna be the lady that's wrapped around in a bath towel and being kissed by a strange man.
Yeah.
So, those roles were switched. So, a lot of cost cutting, but at the same time, there's some cost cutting measures where it doesn't make sense with the casting. Which I'm pretty sure with Miss Tarot we're gonna get to for dislikes.
I,
Um,
I definitely find it interesting that like they had made their mind up on the people acting the roles and were willing to switch them rather than to find somebody new. Like I think that's a really neat concept that I don't know how much that exists anymore.
yeah, that is true. I can't really think of much where it was. Obviously, yeah, Bernard Lee as M, the head of MI6. He's gonna be here for. We're gonna see him as M for a while. I th- at least clear into yeah, clear into like Roger Moore's term, who is the third Bond. Um, John Kitzmiller as Quarrel. He was actually he was one of the few well-known actors at the time, at least if you were into like European cinema. Like he actually has an Academy Award, not Academy Award, but like an award for like acting in the Cannes Film Festival. Um, and Joseph Wiseman, who was famous for being in the movie Dial M for Murder. He is wait, no, shit, sorry, no. Joseph Wiseman's in Detective Story, sorry. Another person, Anthony Dawson, he's in Dial M for Murder and got the job because he was friends with Terrence Young, and then plays a different character in subsequent films due to being friends with Terrence Young. But Joseph Wiseman got the job for Dr. No due to his uh, acting in Detective Story, and him and maybe Jack Lord, because I'm not sure when Hawaii Five-0 started, and John Kitzmiller, about like the three most well-known actors on this until like, obviously now Sean Connery's a household name, but back then he wasn't.
Right.
Um, right now, I guess we can talk about like stuff that we liked. I think we should go with you because the main reason why we're doing this podcast is because I like to get it. I figure it'd be nice to actually have a podcast where we have the point of view someone who's not really enthusiastically about Bond.
Sure.
Ted's not gonna have like Connery's suit or the what we found out the 40 grand bikini that Ursula Andress wears in this movie.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I guess my biggest feelings to take away from this film were just that it was really a product of its time. There was a lot of things that made me feel like, holy shit, this is from the 60s, and that was it, you know. I'm a big fan of cinematography as an art form, and there were things about it that like just felt really off. The balancing between the music and the dialogue, just in terms of volume, was pretty significant, but also the way that like sets were very clearly created. It wasn't like, I don't have a really great example, but if you've ever watched Full House, and
Yeah.
like it felt like you were in their home. Yeah, the camera was stationed in one point. No, it wasn't a real home. Yes, it was an absolutely designed set, but it felt like you were in their home. And this just kind of felt like it was panning around a very defined set. It was like watching an episode of The Brady Bunch, where you knew exactly where the camera was coming from. You knew exactly where it was going to point. Like the cinematography of it was exactly the same. They didn't do a whole lot with camera work that made you feel things necessarily. On the same, go ahead.
I was about to say I agree, and especially since like a lot of this was shot in Jamaica because this is set in Jamaica, but you really wouldn't have known it because they do a kind of a piss poor job of like establishing shots of saying like this is Jamaica, as opposed to like uh later Bond films after this. Like you actually feel like you're in that country due to like establishing shots. Wow, here it's like they could have told you like, oh, it's the Bahamas, and you
Yeah,
would have thought it was in the Bahamas.
there were a handful of beach scenes that like let you knew where the environment was supposed to be, but in the grand scheme of things, like they were very clearly prescribed sets.
Right.
On the same topic, the like even the dialogue, the characters, the development of the story felt very 60s in that like there was a whole lot of like racism. I think we were like 5 minutes into watching the movie, and I was like, man, what a weird concept that, you know, good guys all seem to be white and bad guys all seem to be not white. And, you know, they rectified it a little bit.
Right. I mean, with it being set in Jamaica, it makes sense that a lot of the henchmen are, Jamaican.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's like the villain is Asian. All of his like workers in the uh complex, like the evil
Yeah.
bait, the bad guy base are all Asian. The double agent is that leaked Bond's location, Mrs. Taro. Well, not leaked Bond's location, but linked that he arrived.
Right.
Is supposed to be Asian, but is in yellow face. Same with Joseph Wiseman. He is not
Yeah.
Chinese, but thank God it's not like Breakfast at Tiffany's bad. If you ever watched that movie,
Yeah, there's a lot of the racist overtones are absolutely there. I mean, like right at the beginning, the first people who are bad guys are not white. When even before you even get to the Jamaican set, I'm thankful enough that they broke away from every bad guy is is a black guy or is a Jamaican guy, whatever the case may be. But
right, with Dr. Dent played by Anthony Dawson.
yeah, exactly. But like even still, like the bad guys can't just be American guys. They have to be Asian guys. Even when they've casted white people to fill those roles, like there were definitely some very serious racist overtones.
Which...
the sexist, the sexually aggressive, we're gonna call it. That like there's there's a whole lot of things that just felt more acceptable for the 60s that made this movie not quite feel like the social aspect of it held up.
Right. And it's same with some of the cinematography as well. Like there's a lot of rear projection done.
Mm-hmm.
Which is done better in other Bond films that still use the rear projection, but in this one it looks very washed out. Although sometimes when they do use it, like in Dr. No's Lair with the where they're looking at the glass where like all the fish are, which is stock footage of goldfish. But since like the stock footage is like so blown up, they just wrote it into the script. It's like, yeah, the glass is so thick, so it's blowing it up like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so you actually covered that. But and even then that wasn't actually like too bad, but like in the car chase scenes,
Oh.
that was pretty iffy. And I know we're supposed to be talking about like stuff we like on this, but I guess we're doing this in reverse order here. The negatives first. Which unfortunately this one does have a few negatives, but hey, you got to start somewhere. And this isn't the worst Bond film that I've seen by far. This is okay. But also going back to like the sexually aggressive part, with him and Trench, it's not bad because, it's obviously like a mutual thing. If anything, she's more sexually aggressive than he is.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Within that, with the Miss Tarot, it's kind of back and forth. It's more so Bond trying to prod information out of her, while that's me trying to give it like a little bit of like a benefit of the doubt. But unfortunately, with like the Honey Rider part, I think it's just because there's not enough screen time with them both to really like develop much of a relationship between them two.
I agree.
At the end, it's kind of it's like, and her character arc is kind of bugs me a little bit because at first when they introduce her, she's kind of like a little bit threatening and she can really hold her own. But as soon as like they get captured, she just turns into like the damsel in distress and then needs Bond's help and is like completely helpless, which kind of kills that character a little bit.
Yeah,
which sucks.
I obviously I can't speak of the future the same way that you can, but there was definitely a whole lot of like, they just kind of put her in there to prove that he was a womanizer and not because she developed this story at all. And it made their relationship very interesting.
And especially that one scene where she's, what makes it even a little bit more uncomfortable. And could be the way that I interpreted it it probably wasn't meant to come off that way. But while she's talking about like how like the landlord raped her and stuff, and she killed the landlord. And she goes, "Did I do anything wrong?" And he says, "Well, I surely wouldn't make a habit of it." I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure it was meant to imply like shouldn't make a habit of killing people, but it came off due to like how like really sexually aggressive
Yeah.
Bond is in this film as don't make a habit of it because I might, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. There's definitely like that overtone that like it comes off across very awkwardly that way.
And,
That he's definitely putting himself in positions that definitely aren't
right.
socially
And
acceptable for modern times. It was
yeah.
definitely very 60s.
And it's not like he's not it's like it's not like there isn't consent, but it seems heavily coerced at times,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is a no-no.
Yeah.
But um let's see that. Let's see what's a couple other things. Um I do think but maybe it's because we know better now with the internet, but I think it was kind of silly with like the tarantula scene.
Yeah.
Um There first of all, like, there's only, like, very few tarantulas that could possibly kill someone. So you're using a harmless animal to, like, assassinate Bond, and then it gets even cornier with, like, the, music going bam, 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 like, while he's,
Yeah.
like, hitting that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of tone this film's very tonally off on some parts.
I also like we'll take the tarantula scene specifically to talk about the cinematography of it. That like now they're gonna show you some crappy CGI, right? Like
Right,
any modern TV show or movie that you watch is gonna show you some CGI about that spider getting smashed, right? But the Bond was just if it's behind the bed you can't see it, but you still know it's happening, and even that felt forced.
right,
It
right.
definitely sat strange, but you
And
know,
that's the thing, that kinda another issue is that it's kinda like 3 different films smashed together. Because you got the first part where you mentioned that it was, like, more of, like, a detective thing as opposed to, like, a spy thing, although there are spy elements that are really
y-
cool.
yeah, having seen other Bond films, like there was definitely some spy aspect to it. That he was somewhat covert. That there was some aspect of him gaining intelligence. This felt like a '60s cop movie,
Right.
more so than a spy movie.
And then when
Um,
they finally get onto the island of Crab Key, it's more like a kinda like a jungle adventure.
yeah, yeah, he'd already been spotted out. Like the spy element had been lost to it, so it was an adventure like detective drama more than a
And then
spy
at the
movie.
end is when it finally becomes like a Bond film, and, that's it's kinda weird how they all I mean, it works how it all comes together, but at the same time, it's just like you kinda forget where you're at,
Yeah,
and you're just like, "Wow," it's like, "Is this really how it started?" And then at the end, it's like, "Okay, so here's the Bond film."
yeah.
And
I definitely felt through the movie that like on before we get to things that we enjoyed, the last like real note I had as far as like this kind of felt weird was that like there wasn't a whole lot of exposition.
right.
I had chalked some of that up to people were hyped about the novels or however it may have been promoted in the '60s or whatever the case may have been that made it feel different to the viewers of the time than me watching it 50 years later. 60 years later, God. but yeah, but there like the premise of Bond didn't feel super prevalent. Like it felt like you kind of had to go in knowing it surprised me. If I had watched this with no backstory, I would have felt somewhat lost in that like I didn't know Bond and it just kind of got into it. They didn't really explain the problem super thoroughly. They didn't explain the characters super thoroughly. It was just kind of you knew who
It
Bond
also
was and
did
this is what he was supposed to do.
right. It also probably didn't help that, some of us were also bullshitting during when the villain revealed, like,
Yeah.
the entire And all honestly, even though I like Joseph Wiseman as Dr. No, despite the, yellow face, which is subtle, but at the same time, you could have gotten an Asian actor.
Right. Right.
But, especially with, like, Miss Taro, which originally was supposed to be played by a Jamaican actor. Because at first I'm like, well, maybe the reason why they had, like, a white actor is because, with it being, 62, 63 when it was, like, released, 62 in the UK,
Yeah.
63 in the US. So 61 when they were making this, they probably didn't want, like, a actual, like, interracial love scene. Because they did have problems with that with Live and Let Die, like, they had to actually cut out a interracial love scene in Live and Let Die so that way it got released in South Africa. But when I found out Miss Tara was gonna be played by Miss Jamaica,
Right.
I'm just like, "Then what was the point?"
Yeah.
But I will give Terrence Young this, he told her not to play it as a Chinese lady, but play it as a Mid-Atlantic lady.
Which was helpful. Like as far as the characters in, racist costume design goes, like I don't think that was super overt. You could have overlooked the people in yellowface if you weren't looking for it.
Right, and if all honesty, like, every time I kinda watch it, I forget those characters are supposed to be Asian.
Right. Right. I like it. Those weren't super overt. If it weren't for everybody else in the layer being Asian, then I think that like it wasn't a thing that you would have like
Yeah,
really
because
been
I was
aware
like,
of.
because I was looking back, I'm like, who else could they have for, like, Doctor No? And when they were thinking about casting, like, I know Ian Fleming asked, like, asked them, this was after they casted, Joseph Wiseman as, but Ian Fleming suggested his, step cousin Christopher Lee, who does play a Bond villain later on in The Man with the Golden Gun, as the role. And, obviously Christopher Lee is a white person. It seems like they all, for Doctor No, like Max von Sydow, who plays Ming in the '80s Flash Gordon movie, which won't be the first time we make a reference to that movie. Oddly enough, it's weird, but uh, actually, more what I thought about it, because the same movie, but we're gonna reference Flash Gordon again. We're actually gonna reference Indiana Jones again.
Yeah.
Because Sean Connery's in Last Crusade. Well, there's a character from Last Crusade and like another Indiana Jones film that's in that in that film.
Honestly,
So
that was one of the things I enjoyed the most. Not to take your transition there, but like that, it was really cool to see a whole lot of things that I've seen in other films and start to question whether those came from Bond or whether those came from somewhere else before Bond.
right,
There was one scene as we were watching that I specifically mentioned, like, hey, this looks exactly like when he's crawling through the airspace or the air duct in Die Hard. Like that, they took the camera angle, they took the visuals of it, and it was Die Hard, but for all intents and purposes. And
yeah.
it made me wonder if like Die Hard took it from Bond or if it existed pre-Bond, and that was kind of a cool thing to see the way that like the movies have interacted since the 60s to where we are now, that you're still catching some of the same feelings.
Yeah, and you get that throughout like other Bond films that they'll reference like other Bond films, oddly enough. Because you have tropes like Bond, James Bond, which actually started because like Sylvia Trench introduces herself as Trench Sylvia Trench, and Bond just copies her, and that becomes a trope later on,
Yeah.
like in all the other Bond films. The martini scene, which is funny because I don't. It's not like Bond doesn't say shake, vodka martini, shaken not stirred. It's the guy that's the hotel person. He goes,
Yeah.
"Yeah, martini, how you like it? Vodka martini, how do you like it? It's like not stirred, it's shaken with a is it lemon twist or orange twist, whatever.
Yeah.
It's something citrus part. Oddly enough, in the books, that's not what Bond drinks. Is just a vodka martini, shaken, not stirred. It's actually more in depth. It's what's called a Vesper, which he named after a character, basically the Bond girl in Casino Royale that Bond ends up falling for. He names the drink after her. and it's a lot more in depth. I assume that they probably didn't have the drink because they just probably wanted to save time. So it's just like, it's how you like it. Vodka martini, how you like it.
Right.
It's got all the extra stuff, and then they kind of shortened it to like vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
Also hard to make the
Um,
reference when you start the movies in a different place than you start the books, but yeah, I'm with you.
yeah, which is what we're gonna get to when we get to Live and Let Die, because spoiler alert, Quarrel dies in this film, and it sucks because like he doesn't really get that in depth of a character arc.
Right.
He's like, I mean, he's the part's good, but like there could have been more done with him to make like
Sure.
his depth a little bit more, which I assume in the books, because he appears in one other book at least, and they end up substituting that as opposed to like Quarrel being in Live and Let Die. It's Quarrel Jr. Same exact character, but different name and different actor.
Yeah.
Which they do sometimes in this movie. Because there's a few prototypes. Because Dr. No has like an ominous presence throughout this thing. There's a Bond villain later that has like an ominous presence, and then he has the reveal. And it's done better in the other films, while in this one, it's like, as much as I like Dr. No, he is kind of subtle and a little boring.
Yeah. They
Like,
didn't super thoroughly develop him, yeah.
Because before you see him, he has like this ominous presence around the area, and it's like, oh, and then you see him, and he's just like, yeah, so the US didn't hire me, the USSR didn't hire me, so I joined this terrorist organization by the name of Spectre, and now we are disrupting NASA shuttles for reasons because this organization wanted me to. And Spectre stands for Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. So it is like an anagram, which all that stuff comes up kind of later.
Fair enough.
Which Spectre does not appear in the novel Dr. No. Spectre only appears in the novels Thunderball, which will come into play later, and why you don't really see Spectre outside of the 60s. And the other two films, there's from On Her Majesty, not films, I meant Spectre's substituted for Russia throughout all the films, because with the Cold War tensions, they just didn't want to
make things worse.
They didn't want to, they didn't want to make things worse, which they probably should have done in a later Bond film that we'll get to. Hint: it's the one that Mike saw. But yeah, so Spectre only appears in like 3 books. Thunderball, Under Majesty's Secret Service, and You Only Live Twice, but is basically the overarching bad organization throughout the Connery films, with the exception of Goldfinger, that's standalone.
Right.
Other things, you have the gun barrel sequence, which I thought was really cool. I guess we'll go back into positive since you're being positive.
Sure.
It's kind of odd that since all other films, with the exception of Casino Royale, well, no, I wouldn't say exception to Casino Royale. Casino Royale has a pre-title sequence, but all like other James Bond films have a pre-title sequence that gets started off by the gun barrel sequence, but the gun barrel sequence goes right into the titles, which Casino Royale is the only movie that does that. Oh, and also the other Daniel Craig films don't really have traditional gun barrels except for the last 2, but we can get to that later.
Sure.
Oddly enough, I was shocked that the gun barrel, which is so iconic, was like done last minute, kind of like an afterthought. Like, oh, this would be really cool if we put this in there. So unfortunately, it's not Sean Connery. It's his stunt double, Bill Simmons.
It's interesting how the last second thought turned into a trope throughout all of the movies, though. Like,
Right.
without seeing the Bond movies, any of them, like you're still familiar with the music and the gun barrel sequence. Like, it's still a thing that you know whether you've watched all of the movies or not. And it's interesting that like the first time it happened was an afterthought.
Right. And then by the time we get to Thunderball, that's when it's Sean Connery because they had to reshoot it in widescreen. So they kept using the. I think it's kind of funny. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, we'll just use the same gun barrel for every movie. We don't have to reshoot that.
yeah,
So, um, there's that. I also like how there's a lot of foreshadowing to things. It seems that every time like they give you like a thread to something, there's a payoff.
yeah.
Like the song from Underneath the Mango Tree, I'm like, okay, it's really nice that we're hearing this, but like, why do we keep hearing it? And then it's used to reveal, the scene with Honey Rider coming out of the water, which is one of the most iconic scenes from this movie.
Yeah, it was definitely cool that like they had the whole movie in mind as they produced all of the individual pieces of it.
Right. Also, him doing like the spy craft stuff, as in like pulling his hair out, putting it over the um closet door, to see if anybody like went into his closet. The stuff that he does with the briefcase to see if there's fingerprints on the briefcase. Um, the Bond quips that he has are actually pretty good, especially
Yeah,
like the. But what's even better about that is not so much the quip itself. Um, it's like after like the car chase, the car goes over the embankment and blows up. And the dude goes
yeah,
that the construction worker goes up to Bug goes, um he goes, "What happened?" I think they were going to a funeral. And then like the construction guy's
yeah,
like his
yeah.
reaction's like, "Really, dude?" Um I also like the fact that Bond does this quite a little bit better in other things where he kind of blows his cover on purpose to agitate the villains so that way they can reveal more information quickly while being on edge as opposed to like staying undercover. Although in this thing it seems like he's a little bit doing it just because, well, my cover's blown, why bother?
Yeah,
Um I also love the scene where he's with like Miss Taro. Taro's like on the phone, and then you see like Bond with the towel wrapped around his hand, like he's gonna like you think he's gonna like, garrote her with the towel,
yeah,
but like decides like not to. Like that scene gets kind of tense. And also again with like references, this ends up getting referenced in a later Bond film. Uh that's when Bond and Dent uh Bond confronts Dent, and then like Dent goes for his gun and it doesn't have any bullets because he shot it later. He goes, "Oh yes." Bond goes, "Oh yeah, Smith and Wesson, you had your six," and then just shoots him dead right there. That actually gets referenced a little bit later in another film where it's actually the Bond villain that's saying that. He goes, "Well, you've had your eight, and then the villain has a machine gun, so here's my 80."
yeah. The movie was written well. Once you'd seen the whole thing, I felt that the plot was super developed. The dialogue was thought out. And it definitely fit a form. Like they definitely knew what they were going for. They did everything very on purpose, which I absolutely admire the writing of the film for it.
And the fight scene at the end, the climax is like worth it too. Like the fight scene between Bond and Doctor No is pretty damn good, especially for the 60s, and especially with
And
like the couple other fights to begin with that aren't that great.
yeah, yeah,
At least that
and it felt
fight was good.
realistic. It felt realistic was my biggest takeaway. That like, you've watched a million action films and you've seen it that just sounds like punching, dudes grunting, some dude flies across the room. Like this movie, that fight scene specifically was like it felt realistic, like that
And it
it
was
could have
kind of
genuinely
brutal
happened.
too.
Yeah,
Like they're just beating the shit out of each other on like this platform. And then Bond just somehow is able to get away from Dr. No. Dr. No boils the death in the fucking water. Which gruesome Bond villain deaths. There, a trope started from the
Yeah.
first one, right from the get go, and honestly, one of the better Bond villain deaths. More when I think about it, I mean, there's some that are better than that one, but and then there's ones that are a lot worse, and one that's really bad, but it's so bad that it's good. You'll know what I'm talking about when you see it. Actually, no, there's a couple of them, but one's due to because of it being shot in the '60s. The other one's like, why did they do it that way? um, but that being said, overall, I thought it was not the best Bond movie, but not a bad way to start off.
Yeah, solid, especially considering the times. I don't really have any like large complaints that it's not like I wouldn't watch it again. It wasn't bad. It was a weird way to start off what I know the Bond franchise to be based on what I've seen, but yeah, overall pretty good.
And with that being said, the next episode we are going to do will be From Russia with Love when we get to watching that. And that being said, subscribe to Ted Green Eagles on Twitch. Like and subscribe this video on YouTube if you like it. Well, I guess subscribe the video, but subscribe the YouTube channel. And go check out the other people that are part of Cringe Crew Gaming, such as Budward and
Xenon.
Mike Xenon, whatever numbers his numbers are.
Yeah, we'll link a whole bunch of stuff in the chat. If you're interested in Stallman's content, obviously follow him on Twitch as well. Check out
Which
the
will
Cringe
be under
Crew.
Traductus.
Absolutely, yeah. Check out everything else that the Cringe Crew has. And if you're interested, by the time you've seen this episode, if you're interested in catching up or watching future Bond films, we're watching them in the Discord on Tuesday evenings. So feel free to join in for that.
All right, now see ya.
Have a good one.